This is Makhdoom Shahabuddin, and tonight we bring you the definitive account of the collapse of Pakistan-Afghanistan talks in Istanbul and what it means for our national security. Ladies and gentlemen, another round of high-level dialogue between the government of Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban regime held in Istanbul, Turkey from October 25 to October 29 concluded in definitive failure. The talks mediated by Qatar and Turkey yielded no workable solution to the critical challenge of cross-border terrorism. This outcome confirms the exhaustion of diplomatic options. Pakistan's singular objective was to secure verifiable action by the Afghan regime to prevent the use of Afghan soil as a base for terrorist entities, specifically the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, also known as Fitna al-Khawarij, and BLA, identified as Fitna al-Hindustan. Ladies and gentlemen, despite Pakistan providing sufficient and irrefutable evidence of the sanctuaries and operational links of these groups, the Afghan Taliban delegation refused to move from factual acknowledgement to operational commitment. This refusal demonstrated a deliberate institutional unwillingness to fulfill counter-terrorism obligations under international frameworks, including the 2020 Doha Agreement. Pakistan's Information Minister Ataullah Tarar stated that the Afghan side resorted to blame games, deflection and ruses, undermining the dialogue process. Thus, the Istanbul round served one crucial purpose. It established an internationally witnessed record of the Afghan Taliban's non-compliance, securing diplomatic justification for Pakistan's next phase decisive security measures. The National Security Committee was convened immediately after the collapse of talks. It finalized the implementation of a firm commitment to decimate the terrorists, their sanctuaries, their abettors and supporters. This marks a decisive shift from a policy centered on dialogue to one prioritizing high-intensity counter-terrorism operations using all necessary state resources to protect Pakistan's sovereignty and people. The breakdown in Istanbul was not unexpected. Since the Taliban takeover in 2021, Pakistan has repeatedly sought cooperation based on the promises made in the Doha Agreement, guarantees that Afghan soil would not be used against any other nation. Ladies and gentlemen, those commitments have been systematically violated. The unchecked rise of the TTP, its access to US origin weapons worth billions of dollars, and the surge in cross-border attacks have transformed it into a regional menace. The TTP's enhanced firepower and coordination with the BLA now pose an existential threat to Pakistan's Western security architecture. The Afghan Taliban's refusal to act against these groups is not due to incapacity. It is ideological. It reflects a political choice, not a technical constraint. In Istanbul, Pakistan entered with clarity and evidence. The Afghan delegation entered with evasions. At one point, when faced with photographic proof of dead terrorists carrying Afghan IDs, the Taliban negotiators had no response. They repeatedly sought instructions from Kandahar and Kabul and ultimately refused to sign any written commitments. The hosts, Turkey and Qatar, acknowledged the authenticity of Pakistan's evidence, confirming its factual validity. The Afghan delegation's refusal to act despite this acknowledgement created what Pakistan's delegation called the evidence-action disconnect, a clear sign that the problem was ideological, not logistical. The breakdown of talks also exposed internal fractures within the Taliban regime itself. Decisions taken tentatively in Istanbul were later reversed after guidance from Kandahar, confirming that ultimate authority rests with the hardline faction led by Supreme Leader Haibatullah Akhundzada. This Kandahar veto ensures that even if Kabul ministers wish to cooperate, they are overruled by ideological control. The TTP-Taliban relationship remains the most significant barrier to peace. For the Taliban's hardline core, acting against the TTP would mean turning weapons into a group seen as ideological kin. It would risk internal dissent and rebellion within their own ranks. Therefore, cooperation is impossible as long as this ideological proximity persists. Pakistan now recognizes that the Afghan regime thrives on instability, a war economy that profits from illicit trade, smuggling, and the strategic leverage created by hosting non-state actors. Ladies and gentlemen, peace brings accountability. War brings survival. This calculus explained the Taliban's repeated refusal to cooperate even when evidence was undeniable. During the Istanbul discussions, the Afghan side claimed it had no control over the TTP. Pakistan viewed this not as denial of capacity but denial of will, a convenient excuse to retain plausible deniability while maintaining strategic depth. The Taliban's objective is clear: to keep the TTP alive as a tool of pressure against Pakistan without bearing open responsibility. Pakistan's response is equally clear. With diplomacy exhausted, the National Security Committee has authorized all necessary actions to decimate terrorist infrastructure wherever it exists. This includes proactive cross-border strikes, intensified intelligence operations, and reinforced border control measures. The failure of Istanbul talks has ended Pakistan's patience. After 4 years of dialogue, hundreds of martyrs, and repeated acts of aggression from across the border, the time for talks has passed. The policy has pivoted from reliance on words to reliance on action. Pakistan will now proceed with a refined kinetic strategy focused on targeted dissipation of the TTP's leadership and infrastructure. This approach emphasizes precision and speed, short duration, high impact operations rather than prolonged campaigns. The objective is deterrence through decisiveness, ensuring the destruction of operational sanctuaries without compromising national economic stability. Simultaneously, Pakistan will pursue integrated border management and technological dominance. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2,600-kilometer frontier will be monitored by layered surveillance systems, drones and electronic sensors, reducing human vulnerability and ending dependence on Afghan cooperation. Technological overmatch will replace political trust. On the diplomatic front, Pakistan will isolate the Afghan regime by sharing the Istanbul talks evidence with key allies and international bodies. Regional consultations will be intensified with China, Iran, and Central Asian republics to build consensus around the recognition of the Taliban's non-compliance as the root cause of regional instability. Following the talks' failure, Iran has offered to mediate. While Pakistan values Iran's regional stability efforts, any future mediation must begin with the condition of verifiable action, using the Istanbul talks evidence as the baseline. No dialogue will be entertained without enforcement mechanisms. The Taliban's predictable response has been to launch a propaganda campaign, claiming that the TTP is Pakistan's internal problem, alleging terrorism from Pakistan's side and accusing Islamabad of undermining Afghan independence. This narrative mirrors Indian disinformation strategy. It is a deflection, not a defense. Pakistan was among the first to recognize Afghanistan's independence and has repeatedly defended its sovereignty against foreign aggression. The Taliban regime's statements are not new. They are recycled fabrications meant to hide their own complicity. But with the world having witnessed the Istanbul talks, evidence, and the Taliban's refusal to act, these fabrications no longer carry weight. The warnings of open war issued before Istanbul must now be understood as calibrated deterrence. Pakistan does not seek conflict, but it will no longer tolerate aggression. If Afghan soil continues to be used for terrorism, Pakistan will act decisively under its right of self-defense. Diplomatically, Pakistan has expressed gratitude to Turkey and Qatar for their sincere mediation. By doing so, Pakistan has preserved international credibility and ensured that the blame for failure lies solely with the Afghan regime. The lesson from the Istanbul talks is clear. Peace cannot be built on ideological rigidity. Partnership cannot exist with denial. And diplomacy cannot function where one side negotiates in bad faith. The Afghan Taliban's refusal to confront the TTP has left Pakistan with only one course: coercive defense. This new policy of active deterrence will impose maximum cost on the networks of Fitna al-Khawarij and Fitna al-Hindustan until the threat is neutralized. The international community has now seen the truth. Pakistan gave peace every chance. The Afghan regime chose deceit. Now Pakistan will choose security. This is Makhdoom Shahabuddin signing off. Pakistan Zindabad.